thank you very much for attending. I know it's late in the day, and my session isn't particularly technical, so if you're brain fried, this might be the session for you, because I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about what we do at production studios around creating audience centricity and kind of trying to change the experience for online audiences. And my name is Travis Petershagen. I have been delivering webcasts for Microsoft since about 1998. And in 1998, in the early years, it was a very different world. We were very focused on just getting video capture content to the web in a way that looked good, being able to get it down very thin pipes at that time, 100 kilobits per second. How do we light it so that it doesn't turn into blocking? It was all very much a science back then. And nowadays, it's very different. We still have our technical challenges, many of which we've talked about today and talked about through the various sessions today. But it's a very different world than it was back when I started. But even still, I have a confession to make, which is a good 50% of the shows that we deliver are pretty painful to watch. They're pretty awful, and not from a technical perspective. That's better than it's ever been before. We're delivering HD, we've got scale, we're not buffering, things are great, but the content is just fairly dull across the board. So this session is a little bit about how we're trying to combat that and make it better, and the idea that enterprise video doesn't have to be awful video, and to really change the mentality from a meeting mentality to more of a broadcast mentality in order to better serve audiences. First, a little bit about production studios. We are Microsoft's internal media arm. We have a 65,000 square foot facility in Redmond, Washington. We're about 20-ish employees, and we scale a lot through production companies. We have a technical side of the house where I live, and we also have kind of a solutions and producing side of the house. But we partner very closely in delivering content to the enterprise. Internally, we surface content in a couple different ways. We have an internal portal called Infopedia Media at Microsoft. It's not that different than portals you might be used to. It's got social features, the concept of channels. It's secure, it's available internal and on our intranet. It serves up live and on-demand content, and it's where about 90% of the shows we produce end up at the end of the day. The other place is more of a custom environment. So we'll use either existing virtual event platforms that are out there on the market, InExpo or Social 27 are a couple of the providers that come to mind, or we'll make something completely custom. And that's usually, that's the picture that's on the right, and it's usually something that we've designed specifically for a conference, a longer term summit, something that's kind of got its own brand identity of sorts. To give you an idea of a little bit of context around how we're trying to elevate the broadcast experience, I wanted to play a little video. This one's a couple years old. It's from our company meeting 2 years ago. Our company meeting is one of our biggest internal facing employee events. It's got a pretty good budget. It's got a significant in-person audience. It's probably about 20,000 people who watch present in the arena, and then another 25 or 30,000 who watch live online. So it actually has a pretty significant budget, and so we have some opportunities to do some things to really drive audience centricity, but not everything we do, probably like many folks in enterprise, have significant budgets, so that's not always the case. But let me play this for you really quick.
The core team asked us to figure out a way to elevate the online experience for those employees who could not attend the event at the Key.
So this year for company meeting, we're doing the webcast in a whole different way.
Second half of company meeting at 2012 underway at Key Arena. Let's join it in progress. Go!
We're producing this for the online audience.
Our customer satisfaction keeps going up.
Lou Gellos joining me here as we come to you live from Microsoft Production Studios.
It's been streamed before, but we've never hosted it live.
Chief Marketing Officer Chris Capicella.
Seeing the products is just so much fun.
We're talking about 7 hours of coverage.
Hello, Australia.
Hello, Lou.
There are over 100 countries around the world participating, not watching, but participating in this webcast.
Has taken us to a new level of super excitement.
Enjoy the show.
This company meeting is an enhanced live broadcast with many of the viewers being able to be included through the internet.
This one from Don. Love this TV-style format for the hashtag company meeting. Well done. 2 exclamations.
Microsoft Production Studios is at the center, and we're receiving content from Key Arena out here, all the keynote content all day long. Also at Key Arena, we have 2 reporters on site that provide additional context. And then all around the world, we have Skype viewing parties that are coming in all directly into Microsoft Production Studios.
We bring together the expertise, the technology, the people needed to make an experience. And so that people can get lost and engaged in the content and not wonder how it was delivered or what technology is happening in the background.
What are the big moments that everybody's talking about on Yammer? We sort of got all that for you.
The next 100 years are ours.
It gives the online viewer a whole new experience, much deeper and richer than they had before.
And it's all coming through this one place, and the whole company is sharing a moment together in the new era for Microsoft.
So it's kind of a promo video, but gives you an idea of how we're elevating that experience. And on my side of the house, I kind of come from the technical background, the engineers and the service providers that deliver that content. But even from that perspective, we've been starting to change the conversation. We traditionally, perhaps embarrassingly enough, were in a position that when folks said, hey, we have an event we need to do, we would go straight to the execution type details. How many presenters are you going to have? Do you have an in-person audience? How many demos? How many, is it PowerPoint? Is it video playback and things like that? And we've really started to step back in the last few years and elevate the conversation to a much higher level first. It seems like common sense, but in the volume that is the corporate environment, it's hard to do that. So we're now in a place where we try to get in, even if it's a brief conversation with the event owners, to say, what are your core objectives? What are you trying to accomplish? And what we found is that the event owners don't often have clarity on what their core objectives are. They may come to the table saying that, well, I do an event, on all hands every quarter, and we have conversations with the team. But until you really press and get a little bit more information, you don't have much you can work with. An example of really diving into this, we often we'll get folks who say, well, it's on my quarterly scorecard. I talk to my team regularly. That's why I'm doing it. You ask why a few more times, and you can usually get to, well, we've got some new initiatives at play. We're trying to energize people around these new initiatives. And when you get to that kind of level, you can start to craft content differently, actually create the show flow and how you engage participants differently. So we've brought that to the table far earlier than we used to. And then we also ask, who is your audience? And granted, this is a much more varied question when you're asking about events that are facing external customers and external viewers. But even within the enterprise, there are often very different demographics at play, either because they're stretched globally around the corporation, or they have a different lengths and level or different roles. And so we try to understand what's the dynamic of the audience that's going to be using this content, and how do we cater that to them. We definitely have this concept that the attendee is not the same as the audience. Your large group of attendees may have many sub-audiences within it that have different views and perspectives and different ways to be communicated to. And why is that important? This kind of goes without saying, but audience attention online is hard to keep. It is really difficult. There's a lot of different priorities vying for our time when we're in the office, and frankly, a online audience is not captive, such as an in-person audience. I appreciate you all being here today. You're probably less inclined to walk out if you find the content's boring or not up your alley, because I'm staring at you, and especially now that I've brought it up. But online, that doesn't happen, and when you get pressed with virtual email and meetings and people invading your space, if you're not engaged in that content, you're going to tune out. And often we see folks say, well, I was going to just catch the rest on demand, which also we don't find happens quite regularly. So to that end, we think that really taking the time to cater content to our audiences has benefit. And in many cases, the online audience is larger than the in-person audience. And this is another bias we see in a lot of folks who do events. They're going to typically be in the room with the audience, looking people in the eye. And so with their teams, maybe their managers, and they tend to give a bias and a preference to planning that part of the broadcast, even though in many cases we find that the online broadcast is larger, potentially has more impact when reached effectively. And it doesn't matter what you're saying if the audience isn't listening. There's a quote I like by a public relations CEO named Kevin Murray that it's kind of lengthy, but you have not communicated successfully if people have not heard you, understood you, and do not feel motivated to think differently and act differently as a result of your words. And again, in the enterprise, I think we don't give each event the kind of focus that it deserves around the fact that these are happening for a reason. Someone has a communication objective, and the intention is to reinforce or change the behaviors of the audiences. And so we try to keep reminding people that this isn't just a cadence in your daily enterprise corporate life. This is actually a communication that's trying to drive behavioral change. But even that being the case, how do we know what audiences want? How do we know what it means to be audience-centric? And this is where we take a few different approaches because we don't have a silver bullet. I'm just here today to kind of share the way we view and look at this, and also what we've kind of learned and believed to date. The first thing we do is we ask them. We ask our audiences through surveys and polls, through social media conversations, through focus groups, although internally we call these focus groups listening tours. But really the goal of it is to find out what do they care about and how do they want to be communicated to. The challenge is it reminds me of this Henry Ford quote, is when you ask customers what they want, if he were to have asked customers what they want, they would have said they wanted a faster horse. And that's certainly what we find when it comes to creative engagement tactics and features. They'll often say, well, I would have liked to hear more about this topic, and I really hated this feature, but we rarely hear anyone really be able to describe tangibly what they want, and we would expect that. The other thing I note is I've mentioned a couple times that I'm on more of the technical or production side of the house, and I think that, and there's kind of a tendency to say, well, I'm technical, I'm engineering, I'm services, so I don't need to participate in crafting the show. That's someone else's job, that's producers, that's creative, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's back to this faster horse comment. Often the engineers and the service teams are the ones who know what's possible, who know where you can kind of push the technology, do things different, incorporate people differently. So I really have been putting a strong focus into getting all teams elevated to understanding the impacts of an event, because you really get a lot more ideas at the table on how to make events successful. So if we can't get everything we want out of asking them, what else can we do? We observe them. We pay a lot of attention to how they engage in features that we put out there. We use, I would imagine, a pretty standard set of features that you're used to seeing in Webcasts. One of the most popular features that we use in our organization is social. Microsoft owns and has a service called Yammer. So Yammer is very big in our organization. And we've found that when we use social features and use them well by driving engagement in the show content and using hashtags and things like that, that we will get longer retention and more energy around events. We've also found that if there's technical problems or challenges, either single end users or some kind of systemic problem in the network, then those social conversations will tank super fast, and they'll distract and they'll take away from the core message. So we've implemented at Microsoft the concept of a social help desk. And we basically, for all of our live events, will have a help desk that is proactively scanning social conversations in search of problems, so that as soon as they're addressed, they can be intercepted, that person can be brought back into the webcast experience, and as importantly, cease to tank the social conversations and keep that, we really have a focus in keeping that, those social threads about the content, and hopefully, if we're crafting things right, positive and moving toward the business objective we've put out and stated. So because we use social, we don't use as much moderated chat and Q&A anymore. When we did use Q&A and moderated chat, it wasn't as important. It probably was as important. It wasn't as visible if we weren't proactively helping people, because usually we'd use a moderated chat that would hide those threads from the end users. But we actually really do like the social aspect of it all. And so we don't use Q&A and moderated chat that frequently at all anymore. Polling questions. Polling questions are a tough one, as they really have a value. Studies show that attention spans, people have, even in content they appreciate, they have an attention span of about 7 to 10 minutes before their minds start to wander. 7 to 10 minutes. And so polling questions traditionally has been used by a lot of folks to try and reset that clock every so often by engaging the audience, asking a question. And while that's great, and I love the tactic, and in fact, we've had research to show that polling questions will increase audience retention by about 25% in most cases. We've also found that our presenters and our content owners aren't awesome at integrating those polling pulling that data into the show in real time. And so they'll basically, the last questions, they will get a response that says, okay, maybe the viewers are overwhelmingly developers instead of program managers. But then they won't know what to do with that, and they'll just continue with the show as scripted, and things won't change. And as a result, we'll see some frustration and usual drop off in the engagement of the polling features. So again, because we haven't really cracked the code on how to best use that data, we've kind of stopped using polling questions. Metrics, of course, is a way we track our success. We really put a strong focus on unique viewers and average viewing time. Our goal is to, especially for episodic content or content that we kind of track over time, our goal is to bring more people into the live and on-demand viewing environments, but also stay longer. A lot of the focus of some of the techniques we deploy are to get people to not just show up, say they were there for 10 minutes and be gone, but to actually stay and get the value out of the content. So, but we also look at other metrics to kind of find out what they might want in the future. So are they coming on different devices, different tablets? We're Microsoft, so we're a little bit more Surface and PC centric, but we do still have a strong push for mobile. Mobile is a challenging area for us still. In fact, I think you're from Oracle? Is that, yeah, I think earlier today you'd mentioned security, accessibility, or mobile, pick two. I might be paraphrasing, but we run into that problem too in terms of securely delivering content in the enterprise on mobile. So we're seeing that though in the metrics, that there's an interest there to participate that way. The final thing I'll say about metrics is metrics can come from interesting places. We had an event a little while back that this one isn't going on my resume, and it was a challenge, but about a year and a half ago, we did a developer conference. It was external facing, and it was about 8,000 people in the room and another 25,000 or so watching online. I'll spare you all the gory details, but the primary and backup encoders for the webcasts went down in the middle of the show. If you're interested, I'll tell you later at the reception. But the bad day, bad moment. We had everything back up in 45 seconds, but we truly lost the entire webcast. So after I came out from under my desk about a week later, we started correlating data, and we found that in the actual venue, the in-person audience, at the time of that 45-second collapse of the webcast, Wi-Fi traffic on the internal network dropped by about 65%, which really showed that a significant amount of audience in the venue were watching the webcast. So we haven't figured out what to do exactly with that data yet, but we're starting to explore second screen experiences and starting to wonder if a second screen experience could work in a live environment when you're actually staring at the presenter in real time. But the moral of the story is you never know where the data is going to come from, even failures. The other way we try to innovate in this space and be audience-centric is borrowing from people who do it well. And specifically, that's television and radio. And if you think about it, television and radio have a very simple model. Their job is to attract and retain audiences for as long as possible in order to sell advertising. And in the enterprise, I feel like we're really trying to attract and retain audiences in order to deliver communication. So there's no reason that we should be happy with the status quo of delivering dull and unengaging content. Now, that's not to say that you should lose track of your business objective in there and just get fancy and entertaining. But there's no reason corporate content should be dull. One area we attacked first was really taking from the idea of sports, pre-show, post-show, halftime show. For long events, for most tier 1 events now, that is events that we consider pretty important, we have implemented the concept of a pre-show. Pre-show can be pretty highly produced, similar to some of the stuff you might have saw in that video, or it can be actually pretty straightforward, where a executive comes up before the main act and talks about things that are important to the company at that time. We usually have our pre-shows be about 15 minutes, sometimes they're 30, but we found it really warms up the audience. It gets the audience engaged and talking on social platforms early, which reminds others that the event is happening, so that's always good. It lets us selfishly warm up our platforms and services. So we get a chance for people to gradually ramp on instead of just all show up right on at a specific time. And then we've also seen that before we started the pre-show, a good portion of the audience would start to show up 5, 6, 7 minutes into the event or longer. And the pre-show has kind of backed them in so that we know that they're there and they're watching by the time the show starts. Did you have a question?
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I love this concept of pre-shows. This idea, I do this all over the world in these types of broadcasts for the B2B world. We're a B2B publisher. And, you know, how do you retain the audience? How do you keep them on? How do you keep, because it's just mind-numbing content. But I like the idea, do you have like maybe your host or your anchor and like the same people every time, that you build like an audience of these guys are dynamic, these guys are good, and oh, I can't wait for Rick to jokes before the show?
It's a good question. We mix it up. There's been times we've used professional talent, but we try not to do that. What we've been doing is grooming internal talent inside the company that are just good and social, but they're Microsoft employees. They can speak authentically. We do have a couple of folks who are kind of in training or communication roles. So one of the fellows you just saw in the last video is Lou. He's one of our PR guys. So by definition, his job is to talk to media. So he's kind of like, yeah, I can come down and do a pre-show. You know, he doesn't take a lot of preparation. But we're kind of mixing it up. So we do a little bit of it all, but we try to keep Microsoft employees doing it to keep it authentic and keep it real. And because the Microsoft employees can truly bring perspective and ask interesting questions through those show processes. The halftime show, for that matter, we found to be also effective, especially at keeping people through lunch. Online, seeing a lunch break is just kills the momentum of everything. And we see during hybrid events that have a lunch break that we lose a lot of audience at lunch and they don't come back after lunch unless we have a strong closer. Sometimes we can craft it that way so that we have someone that people come back for, but often we lose them and they're gone. The post-show has not been stellar. Try as we might, we're not sports and we don't have big plays of the game to watch. So the post-show, we get an engagement. We see people engaging on social media, talking about it. There's some audience, but we also see in the metrics that audience is falling off significantly. So I wouldn't rush out to do post-shows right away, but the pre-shows have been working really well for us, and I definitely recommend putting those into rotation. Also, we have taken the concept of the sideline reporters. Again, going back to sports, basketball or football, could you imagine if every time they took a timeout or got a penalty, the camera zoomed out to a wide shot and played walk-in music for 3 minutes? It'd be silly, but we do it all the time in corporate video. And it's also a time we will see a jettison of audience. It reminds you you're distracted and you have other things to do, and it's an easy time for people to leave the webcast. Camera-ready training, we also found that not everybody is equal when it comes to performing in front of the camera. So we built a program, kind of a training seminar that people can sign up for and come spend the day doing to learn to be in front of the camera and to talk either through, we have kind of a couple different parts that we walk them through, starting with prompter, talking to the prompter, talking to PowerPoint bullets, being interviewed through teleprompters, things of that nature. And we bring in professional consultants to guide that class. We kind of co-constructed the class together. And that's been really popular with folks who are starting to find themselves on camera more and more regularly. So if somebody's done 1 to 2 or 3 webcasts and they're seeing it as a trend, they'll come in and they'll take the training. And we've had good results from 2 standpoints. One is folks are generally getting better performing on camera as a result of the training, and they're much more confident because they've come in and been trained. So often you can just kind of see that confidence and comfort increase. But it's also been better for the audiences. Again, back to the audience centricity. It's much easier to watch someone who's pretty good on camera than someone who's struggling and confused on camera. Audience participation is one that radio is really good at. Radio has all kinds of different shows that and approaches that bring in audiences, and it's because phones are so easy for consumers to use. End users, audiences could always pick up the phone, call into a radio show. It wasn't complicated. TV is kind of behind in that front because there was never an equivalent until now, and that equivalent, for us anyway, has been Skype. So with Skype, the application is so prevalent across platforms that we find it really easy now for end users to use Skype to call into the show. And we have a couple different ways we use that. In our facility, we use a product called Skype TX, and the keynote is going to be about Skype tomorrow, so I'm sure there'll be a lot more conversation on these topics. But Skype TX is kind of a broadcast interface for Skype. The end users don't have to know anything different or have any kind of training other than to use their Skype app. But on the broadcast end, we're able to really manage those calls, queue them up, make sure people are ready to go on the air, and send it as HDSDI into a production system. So it gives us a lot of kind of that radio level of caller control applied to Skype. Yeah. No, go for it. Like, that's a good question. We've done, I'm not a Skype guy enough, but I know the guy tomorrow at the keynote is, yeah. So I don't know, I've seen Skype walls that are pretty significant with a lot of folks, if that's what you're going for. We've only done about 10 different locations. In fact, the video I want to show is something we've been doing. In addition to just accepting Q&A on Skype, we've also use Skype to bring in presenters who can't fly in, right? It's very easy to just have them set up at their desktop. And so it's great for that. But we've also kind of implemented what we call a Skype audience moment. And this is where we let audiences see each other over Skype and let the in-person audiences see the remote audiences. And it just gives the audience a feeling of being part of the show and not being in some dark closet at the end of the internet, right? So, this particular event was right after a marketing group reorg, and this Skype audience moment was intended to help all of these global teams feel like they were part of this new organization in a compelling way. So I'll just play that for you really quick.
You are seeing the Yammer team in San Francisco. Give it up.
That's not working, is it?
All right, we've got the Skype team in Palo Alto.
Sorry, I don't know what's going on there.
Skype team in Palo Alto. Woo!
I'm gonna try to go away and come back.
You are seeing the Yammer team.
Oh. Well, apologies. I have another clip similar, so hopefully that will play. But let me describe what you would have seen. In that clip, we had 4 different locations from around the world participating, and we were able to put them in this section of boxes so that you could see them all at once, and then as the host of the event called out the locations, we'd pull them up full screen, let them participate and cheer, and it's all real time. And it's just these kind of fun moments that we try to do anytime we have large events that have viewing parties all over the world. We try to create a Skype audience moment so that they can all be aware of each other and realize that it's not just this in-person experience. There's people around the world that are watching. Sorry, trying to find I screwed something up. All right. The other thing I just want to note, we use Skype TX, but New Tech, the folks who make TriCaster, have recently announced a product that's very similar as far as I can tell. I've never used it, but it's called Talk Show. And it's the same kind of idea, but it seems to have direct integration with the TriCaster so that you can configure some of those things and control them right from the TriCaster. Probably keep the crew sizes smaller. We also use Skype for video instant messages. For folks who don't want to deal with being part of the live event, Skype makes it very easy for sending video instant messages, just basically recording your message and sending it off. So we'll incorporate those into the video as much as possible. I'm going to not talk this one up too much in case it doesn't play, but
I love the addition of the video instant messages, and we do have a bunch that we want to make sure we share before we...
All right, sorry, I'm not sure what's going on with the video playback. But with that one, for the particular event, we had, rather than asking folks to send in Q&A, because it really wasn't the intent of the meeting, we wanted people to share with us where they were watching the show from, what part of the world they're from, any kind of relevant stuff about where they're from that they wanted to share. So we were receiving content from people literally viewing at a beach in Australia and watching in various campuses across the globe, and being able to receive all of these instant messages from any device somebody had, and then stitch them all together and play them into the show, kind of brought this whole global dynamic of the audience together. Getting out of the studio is another area we found. I'm an old broadcast guy. Before I came to Microsoft, I worked in television news, and my job was really kind of grunting gear around to do live shots at that time. And so it was not uncommon for the 10 o'clock news to traipse across town, set up in front of the courthouse, do the live shot live from the courthouse, and then traipse it all back to the studio. And nothing had happened at that courthouse for 5-6 hours. We were really just doing that because it projected to the audience that it was newsworthy and that it was remote and that something happened at that courthouse. And as you watch news today, you see that all the time. People are always just setting up in different locations. In the corporate environment, I was not as hot to do that kind of thing because it can be expensive if you do satellite transmission or things of that nature. And let's face it, we have a studio with a controlled environment and my risk is mitigated. And so moving around the company wasn't something that I was eager to participate in. But our CEO was, and he wanted to do, he does a monthly Q&A session, and his preference is to do it from a different building, a different campus, often globally, so that he can kind of be in the presence of different people every time. And sure enough, the audiences actually have been reporting back that they really like the format. They like seeing the other venues. They like seeing the audiences and the different cultures that might be present. And so we're doing it a lot more frequently. Fortunately, technology's come to the point now where remote delivery over IP has become a lot more stable. And we actually haven't had any challenges yet delivering for the last year and a half or so using IP-based technologies like folks that you'll find in the exhibition hall. Teradek is one, Streambox is one we use. LTN Technologies is one we've had great luck with. They're less about the encoding technology and more about managing the path your signal takes over the internet. So if a path looks like it's getting congested, it will dynamically move you around. So they're a slightly different approach. And then live view. We try to get some level of redundancy in every event we do. And so since our primary paths are usually on a wired IP network, we've taken to cellular as our backup paths. And I've actually not really had many challenges with cellular, but I'm just still a little afraid of it as our primary broadcast path. So especially when a lot of, if there's an in-person audience and they're going to show up and start eating up that local bandwidth. So we've had really good experiences with all these devices, so I wanted to show them. But in full disclosure, right now we use the live view predominantly for backup paths. Of course, we recognize audience diversity. Our mode of operation is for every tier 1 event, and now even most kind of second tier events, we do at least English captions. It's basically just become our default standard. We sometimes localize, but localization is very expensive. So we found if you have less expensive ways to do that. But for a live webcast, real-time translation of the languages we found to be pretty expensive. We have 2 ways that we do it when we have to, or when we feel it's the right thing to do. One is to use kind of the United Nations style audio translators, where we put a different audio language in real time on each audio track and then allow end users to select which language they want to hear. Again, very expensive because we found we typically need to bring in, say if we're doing 8 languages, we need to bring in 16 translators because they'll usually need to take breaks about every 20 to 30 minutes. So it adds up into costs really fast. The other approach we've taken for that is machine translated captions. So we've worked with a company called Ply Media that their focus is taking a professional English translator, and then in real time we make the English captions in the normal fashion and send that into a translator hub that converts that via machine translation into multiple different languages. We've done an event that's had 20 languages done that way. The first time we did it, it was a little bit of a challenge because we didn't really provide any cues to the audience that that's what we were doing. So it said basically a list of languages, and you'd select it, and some were really good and some were less good. And since we didn't really provide any cues, the audience kind of just thought some of those translators were not doing really well. Since then though, you can kind of see in this photo, we've changed up the nomenclature a little bit so that you can select English, but the other languages you select will say English, arrow, Germany, English, arrow, Portuguese. And so there's kind of a cue there, and sometimes we'll bring it up in the show or put branding on the site to let people know how we're doing it. Since we've done that and people have the context, they usually like participating in it. They like seeing how well it works. They find that translation is better than not having any translation at all. So it's been successful. And it's very cost effective because we're really just adding a little bit of machine translation on top of what we'd already be doing. Finally, we put a, I kind of covered this already, but we are sensitive to people's desires to be mobile and to have a lot of platform choices, but we are still a little challenged in that department right now for internal facing content, mainly because we typically run into some kind of problem either around security or accessibility when we try to create a mobile experience. So hopefully I'll have a better story by next year, but right now that's still a little bit challenging for us. The other thing I just note is we've seen a preference for rebroadcasting content to other time zones as opposed to just doing a live show and putting it on demand. With the growth of social and even in-person viewing environments, people like to actually have it broadcast again as if live, even though they know it's not live the second time, really so that they can kind of have social conversations or watch it with folks that are in their same time zone. So for an awful lot of shows, even though it seems almost like a step backward, we're starting to broadcast it in the morning and then maybe in the afternoon and again in the evening to hit these global audiences with a real time to play out. Finally, I just wanted to kind of reinforce the importance of bridging the in-person and the online audiences. We do a lot of events that are hybrid, and we see time and time again that the in-person audience gets a lot more love than the online audience. So we do a lot of work to reinforce with the presenters, even to the point of where we can use Skype or other tools to put audience viewing parties in monitors off stage so that they can continually see the online audience. We find that that helps them really kind of zoom in on that audience and refer to them more within the conversations. We try to avoid housekeeping notes whenever possible. It's always fun to be sitting at your desk on a cold, rainy day and hearing about the champagne toast that'll be happening after the session out on the beach. So it seems like a subtle thing, but we try to avoid housekeeping notes. And usually they happen just before presenters speak or just after. So we are just prepared to have other content to take that time and not bring it from the room. Seems like a little thing, but again, everything kind of counts. And finally, I'll end with blackout content. I don't know if this happens to the rest of you, but we do at times have events where we have content that we can play to the in-person audience, but we're not able to play it to external-facing audiences. Usually it's a rights issue, we're not allowed to webcast it, things like that. Well, once we started using social heavily, people hate that. The online audiences who see, we used to just treat it with a slate that said, sorry, due to intellectual property, we are not allowed to show you this, so the show will resume shortly. And everyone gets very angry on the social streams. So this is something we're toying with. We've done this now for about a year. I hope I'll play it. We'll see. Oh, that worked good.
And one that caught my attention online, I'd like to share with you. Roll the video.
Cats and puppies. Long time getting to that, sorry. Yeah, same slate message. Now we put it over cats or puppies. And it's amazing that people like cats and puppies. So now they'll say, oh, great, I'm seeing cats. And it's even gotten to the point that sometimes if the show's later, the content quality dips for whatever reason, you might get someone on the social stream saying, hey, bring back the cats. That's just a little fun experiment. I thought it'd be fun to end on cats. Sorry the video didn't work all that awesome. But the moral of the story, we're trying a lot of things to make our events be less like meetings and less like enterprise environment and more like a broadcast and more audience focused. And we certainly don't have a crystal ball or the silver bullet that we know we're doing everything right. But if there's a takeaway from this session, it's just that enterprise doesn't have to be dull and doesn't have to be painful for audiences. And then if we're not dull and we're not painful, you're going to have more impact on your audiences. You're going to get more bang for your buck and out of that messaging. So I just encourage you to think about that every time you're about to fire up a dull enterprise webcast. That's it. I know we're kind of doing Q&A as we go along, but I think we have about 5 minutes if anyone has any other questions. Yeah, really, the main reason is that that everyone can use Skype globally, and we just have found that it's very simple. It's kind of a consumer-based product, and so we kind of went there. From a brand perspective, I just read that we're announcing that Link is being transitioned to being Skype for Business. I don't think the guts of the technology are, but at least from a brand perspective. But we've just basically found that nobody anywhere really has any kind of challenge if we just say, send us something over Skype. So it's been our preference. We'll do occasional shows that use Link, but I won't give you all the details there. We just found Skype to be easy. Gotcha.
So
Yeah.
Skype is so robust already. I love Skype.
Yeah. Well, and the real value with Skype for us is it's easy for us on the back end because with Skype TX, we have a broadcast interface, so it comes in as Skype from the end user, but we route it out into our production environment as HDSDI, and it's really like any other production asset at that point. So it just makes it really easy from the broadcast side. Yeah, our particular product, Skype is a Microsoft product. The method we use is Skype TX, which is about, I think, a 2RU piece of gear, and you can add as many as you want to create channels that you can use. So we have about 10 that we use. But like I said, that same concept, I think, has been licensed to a variety of others now, and NewTek is one that probably made a pretty sophisticated product that they tie into their TriCaster. So, yeah.
So you mentioned that you were expanding out of the technical ones in content production side. So how did you change maybe the staff, the skill sets you were recruiting for? You had people. How did you deal with it?
We still have a variety of skill sets. We found that everyone agrees with the ideal of it, and it just isn't necessarily, not everyone's great at leading in those kind of efforts. But part of what we do is for events that we can get in front of like this is we make a point to kind of bring a larger triage team together. And rather than, old way was producers show up at the table and say, okay, we've got this worked out. We need 3 cameras, this, that, and the other thing, and everyone kind of does their service. New way is producers or even clients come to the table and says, hey, this is what we're trying to get across. Here's some of the key tenets of our show. Let's brainstorm ways we can do that. And then you actually get the technical team saying, well, we could use an XYZ to bring in audiences from over here. You just get a lot more kind of good ideas and bad ideas. But that's kind of the way we approach it.
So have you looked to bring people into your particular staff that have more producer creative?
Well, we have that already at some degree. We've kind of we have that capability and we have those roles, but we've kind of, for just, I guess, efficiency reasons, have kept those sides of the house somewhat separate over time. So now it's not that we're really changing up the staff particularly, we're changing the way folks work together and the way we craft events. And I'll also say it's not all just our employees that are bringing that kind of value. We have about 30 production companies that we work with regularly as well who can interject some of those kind of goals and some of that creativity. And with that, I guess we're out of time. Thank you very much for taking the time. I know it's 4 o'clock and late in the day, and also we had 10 minutes of technical problems, so I apologize for that, but I appreciate you taking the time.